9B, ordinance number 17-02-01, wind energy conversion systems, section 4.3.76. Review the provisions for decommissioning and enforcement, investigation of violations and remedies. Staff, have anything you'd like to say on that?
Yes, Mr. Chair. We provided the Planning Commission as well as the general public through the website this essentially recommended discussion item on decommissioning. I'm going to start on our last page on what we kind of found through our review of other ordinances and such, that essentially of the 19 communities, there was some variety in decommissioning and enforcement procedures. Of the 19, 17 of them required that money be held in escrow for the purposes of decommissioning, and 11 of the 19 communities assessed, considered a facility to be abandoned after 12 months with no operation. As far as performance guarantee, it ranged all over the board from at the developer's discretion to 100% of decommissioning costs. Now, several of these communities did include enforcement, but they varied based on their own zoning ordinance and how that worked in typical enforcement. We also took into account, again, the MSU revised document that they put out for wind energy and such, and it said that one of the things we picked up on it is an administrative system for periodic review of the decommissioning plan to make sure the amount of performance guarantee is in place over the 20 to 30 years of life expectancy of these turbines. Overall, we found that our ordinance wasn't generally too far off from these basic standards, and that's covered on the first page of the language. As far as updating, essentially, what we had, we again looked at abandonment and operability. We had the 12 months of no operation as being considered abandoned. But we also gave the Planning Commission at its discretion that if a W.E.C.S is inoperable or a state in disrepair that would be a potential threat to public health safety, that you could essentially move forward and that shall be ceased immediately and removed, repaired, or otherwise made safe. We also have a process here on the Planning Commission being able to provide written notice and setting up essentially a hearing, requiring that a professional engineer hired at the expense of the applicant, owner, or operator shall certify safety prior to resumption of operation. We also have that there's a requirement to notify the zoning administrator or our office in the event that there's an occurrence of power collapse, turbine failure, fire, drone blade, collector or feeder line failure, or injury. So that's just some of the general kind of beefed ours up a little bit. As far as decommissioning plan, same as ours was originally, they do need to provide a decommissioning plan. What we did look at those as is beefing that up as to here's how you need to state how it's going to decommission, and also an estimation of cost of decommissioning, and also the financial resources to be used to accomplish the decommissioning. And this, as you can imagine, is most likely going to require an attorney to look at it as well, not just for all of us. We also look at the requirements for the operator to notify us that when it's going to be non-operational or it's reached its life, they must pull a demolition permit within 90 days of that and move forward. One of the things that I think we missed here was that when we're talking about removing all the facility, we didn't include there that we have in there almost a blanket. You have to remove the entire thing, including the foundation. Doesn't make an exception. Usually the cell towers and other types of deep foundation type towers, we ask that they be removed 4 feet below grade. That way agricultural can still continue. It's just trying to put a basement on it, but you would know where that particularly was. We do have a kicker in there that if they do not obtain a demolition permit, then the County Planning Commission, the county itself, has the ability to go ahead and kick into gear as far as decommissioning itself. Now, on page 3 here, I have a number of items here listed for how we walk through the decommissioning and the useful life and such. More and more I'm thinking that we should have a general statement, and I've talked with some counterparts in other areas, it may be best to have a general statement and come up with a developer agreement with the county so that attorneys can get together and really spell this out instead of us maybe over-talking ourselves in this particular language, but just essentially that a decommissioning plan and resources be established for removal of these per development agreement struck between the county and the developer. That would give all the input in there. We can make sure we get the points, but we need to have a good general statement and expression of what the intent is. And I think we're getting there. I just don't want to screw us up by essentially talking too much in our language. So we'll work on that as well. Enforcement, as we said, there's a wide variety because we do have enforcement procedures already established in our ordinance. So what we're looking for is to mostly use that. We also have generic language in there that gives us the ability to use revocation of special use permit and may be required to reimburse the county. Another area where I think we should rely on what's established in our administration and enforcement. That section has been revised by the rewrite committee to add a little more teeth and a little more ability. So those would have to go hand in hand as these things are adopted. That gives us the ability to, in our ordinance enforcement and infractions, the way we do that, if we change that, this would still need to match whatever that is. So as we fine tune that, this will still have to match that from the enforcement side of it. Nothing in here says at 3 o'clock in the morning we're going to go out there with a decibel reading. Nothing in here says that we're going to measure shadow flicker. That's the enforcement side of every land use has its drawbacks. We know that, we've seen that, so that's going to have to be something that we're going to have to keep working towards. This, like it was initially adopted as a living document, we are on a course here of a 1-year adoption. It's anticipated in August or before, and I'm hoping very much before, that we will have essentially a staff recommended complete ordinance for you to review and for the general public to start reviewing as well. I hope in August, at the latest, maybe a special meeting, we need to get it out to the townships for them to review. So it's only July, but we have a 60-day review period by the townships, and we have the whole enchilada to chew on. So that's staff report for right now.
Thank you. Any comments from the audience? Hearing none?
No, just kidding.
Go ahead,
As always, I've got some handouts for everybody, but this time it's a lot lighter reading. I've done a red line of staff's recommendations, most of which I'm in line with. Pass it down, please. But you asked me a question at the last meeting about the number of wind turbines in operation in the U.S.
Yep.
According to the American Wind Energy Association, there are approximately 53,000 wind turbines operating in the U.S. In terms of blade failure, they see a blade failure of approximately 0.54%. So if you are looking at a project of, they haven't said what Apex is looking for, and once again, I don't see them here, but if you're looking for a roughly a 50 turbine project, you're going to have a blade failure approximately every 3.5 years. So over the life of this project, 30 years, you're going to have 8 or 9 blade failures statistically. Obviously, that's just statistics. There's no guarantee that you're going to have that many. You may have more, you may have less. But the likelihood is that you will definitely have blade failures. And for that reason, it makes it all the more critical to have those setbacks. And those setbacks should be from property lines, as we discussed before. And I note that Mr. Preston made a comment tonight about having the sound limits on your agricultural entertainment areas limited at the property lines. Once again, every land use that we have is tied to our property lines, not to our existing structures. So I just wanted to wrap that back up. And then I'll also hand in, I apologize, I only made one copy of this, and it's just kind of colloquial. It's not any direct statistics, but it talks about, one second, I'll hand this over. Is 99% good enough? Because they're going to tell you it's 99.5% reliable for the blade failures. But if 99% were good enough, we'd have 4 plane landings a day at Chicago O'Hare in an unsafe manner. We'd have $1 million documents a year lost by the IRS. 2 major plane crashes every day, 47,000 ATM errors every day, 8,880 credit cards in circulation with the incorrect card holder, 285 automatic ATMs basically installed that'd be malfunctioning in a year. It just goes on and on. So while 99% sounds good, in reality we expect a lot more from our manufacturers and from our devices. So that's just something for you guys to consider on that issue. Moving on to today's topic. I did go through and do a red line. Not a whole lot of changes in here as to the substance, just some things to try to strengthen it. You'll see on page 2 where you're dealing with the abandonment. I've added some language in there that it be immediately removed or repaired to try to take away the gamesmanship that you may see from a wind developer. The other thing I've added in here is a timeline for a hearing. Conduct a timeline within 14 days. That could also be 30 days, but something like that so that you're giving the developer and the citizens an idea of when this hearing will take place. Not just, yeah, we'll have a hearing maybe in 9 months, maybe in a year. This pushes things along.
That will be discussed between the county's attorneys and their attorney when we do this, obviously.
Well, but if it's in your ordinance, then it's a clear process for everyone to follow. The other thing is that I've added language in here just clarifying not just a Michigan professional engineer, because that could run into some games where you've got a Michigan resident, but he's not licensed by the state of Michigan. So I've just clarified the language to make sure that it's a professional engineer licensed by the state of Michigan. And I've given you some additional authority because it's got to be an engineer that's acceptable to the county. You don't want to just have the wind developer come in and say, hey, we brought an engineer. It's our engineer and we pay him and he's going to say whatever we want, but we brought an engineer. And I've added that in there as well below in the decommissioning to make sure that it must contain a decommissioning plan acceptable to the county. Right now, it just says it has to be a decommissioning plan. If it doesn't say it has to be acceptable to the county, there's potential for some gamesmanship there. The other thing you'll look down and see that my suggestion is that you go with a surety bond versus an escrow account or a letter of credit. I would definitely advise against a letter of credit. Surety bond is going to provide you with greater security in terms of a company that's going to be around longer. An escrow account does, but I think you're going to see more pushback from a wind developer that they've got to put millions of dollars into an escrow account that'll sit there for 30 years.
Isn't an escrow account much more secure than a surety bond?
I wouldn't say it's more
Money
secure.
has to be put up front. It's
Right.
good if both parties sign. How much more secure can it get?
Well, the funds could be removed.
By who? They both got to be signed.
Not always. Depends on how it's written up.
It's an escrow.
But again, with the
Both
surety
escrow.
bond, you've got that third-party insurance company that's out there, and typically, you may see that they will come in and perform because it may be cheaper for them as to do the decommissioning as opposed to just sending out a check. So that's why I would
You know where
recommend.
that's been the case before?
I have not been associated with a project that's been decommissioned yet. We just the technology's too young. Yeah. The one thing I will say is that if you do go with a letter of credit, which is one of the things that's mentioned in staff's comments, it needs to be a non-revocable letter of credit. That would be one thing that would definitely be a concern. And if you're going to have a surety bond or a letter of credit or an escrow account, you want a replenishment obligation in there to force them to bring that back up in case it gets used up. The other thing that I've seen in a number of other locations is to make sure that when you get the estimate for decommissioning, you're going to want that bond to be at least 150% of the cost. Because the games that I've seen in other locations is the wind developer will come in and they will show you an opinion from an engineer that says, here's the cost to decommission. Now that plan that they'll show you is to decommission the entire project at once. And so you'll have tremendous savings due to economies of scale. I've yet to see them decommission an entire project all at once. It's onesies,
Have you
twosies.
been involved with any of the decommissioning?
I have been involved, let me rephrase that. I've not been involved. I have been involved in getting estimates for decommissioning from other entities. So if you add that 150% in there, you've given yourself some wiggle room in case there are problems, in case it does come down in ones and twos as opposed to as an entire project. The other thing that I've recommended in here is that biannually, the Planning Commission should review that to see if it's sufficient. The language that staff has given just says that from time to time, Planning Commission may. I think that's a little too loosey-goosey for the type of project that we're dealing with, and I'd like to see that tightened up a little bit to make a clear schedule that we're going to look at this every couple of years, because when it's from time to time when you feel like it, people don't feel like it and it kind of sits on the wayside because it's a pain in the butt. So that's one thing to look at. The other thing that I've seen in other townships, most recently in Argyle Township, is a requirement that if for some reason the surety bond fails and the wind turbine company goes under, that the owner of the property where the turbine is hosted becomes responsible for the cost of decommissioning as opposed to the county. And I think that makes sense. You know, is it likely that the wind turbine company is going to fail and the surety company? Probably not, but it's also nice to have a third backup just in case. So that, well, possibly, unless the funds in escrow have all been used up because you didn't have a sufficient escrow account.
But it's got the replenishment cost.
But you have to have an entity that's existing to replenish it. If you'll notice, if and when this project goes forward, it's not going to be Apex's project. It's going to be whatever LLC they create, and that's who's going to be giving you the money for the replenishment. If the project goes south and that LLC goes under, they don't have any money left to replenish it. And so if it turns out there's not enough there, you're kind of SOL. Pardon the expression. Pretty much. I understand. So that's pretty much where I'm going with that. Not a whole lot of changes necessarily in the language on decommissioning itself. You'll see there's a lot of changes on the complaint resolution side. What staff gave in there is just kind of a general, like he said, a statement of hope, a statement of position of where you want to be with this. In my experience, in dealing with citizens who've had complaints dealing with wind turbines, you need a clear process. Now, what a lot of counties or townships have done in the past is add language that the developer must submit a complaint resolution plan. You're putting the fox in charge of the hen house. I'm supposed to go to complain to the person who's causing the problem. So if Walt here is punching me in the face, I'm supposed to go complain to Walt that, hey, Walt, you're punching me in the face. That's not a proper way of resolving a conflict. So what I've provided is a process to follow that would include providing complaints through the county clerk and through the Board of Commissioners. Because I think it's important that the people who the voters have to answer to the voters directly be in charge of dealing with these complaints. They're the ones that are ultimately going to vote on this ordinance. They're the ones who answer to the voters directly as opposed to appointed officials. They're the ones that should be dealing with all of this so that they answer to the people. And my process as it lays out, you would take the complaint to the county clerk presents it to the board makes a decision, do they think this is a crackpot who's just making up stuff and complains every week, or is this a legitimate complaint? If it's a legitimate complaint, there's an escrow fund created to pay for things like sound testing, shadow flicker testing, etc. That way your citizens aren't forced to come out of pocket thousands of dollars to do the acoustic testing, because I suspect most citizens are not going to have an extra 10 grand lying around to do that type of testing. In the end, you're able to go through and evaluate it, and if it turns out that it is in violation, you can force them to bring it into compliance. But the other thing that I've done is add some real teeth here and add in a penalty of $500 a day. And that's a viable penalty. It's completely permissible under Michigan law. And while it doesn't sound like a whole lot, if you've got multiple turbines that are out of compliance, you've got 10 turbines that are out of compliance, you're at $5,000 a day. That's going to add up real quick, and that's going to get their attention. The real thing that you're going to be dealing with here is enforcement. If this project ever gets built, you've got to figure out how are you going to force this multi-million or multi-billion dollar company to deal with it. This is your way of doing that without bankrupting the county. By having that escrow account there, by getting the professionals involved, the engineers, the acousticians, whoever it is that needs to be involved, at the wind energy company's cost, they're going to be much more inclined to get those things resolved so that they stop spending money on it. So that's what I would encourage. Like I said, the goals are there in the language provided by staff, but I think you need a clear procedure for your citizens to follow, for the wind developer to follow, and for the county to follow as well. Any questions?
Any questions at this time? No.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other comments from the public at this time?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
I own a 40-acre farm out on West Judville Road, and I clearly do not want to see wind turbines coming to my house. I've lived there my whole life. My parents bought the 80-acre farm. My sister has the other 40. And I'm a nurse. I know what these are going to do to people's health in general. And no one seems to care. And if it was in your backyard, you wouldn't want them either. And I don't even know how it came up in our county. You drive up to Ithaca and all them places, and those lights are flashing, and that turbines are going around. It's,
I'm sorry that you think that no one seems to care.
well, I don't
Because
think
that's the
you
reason
care,
we're going through this whole thing
but- Yeah,
right
well,
here.
I hope you do care, but it's, I
Well,
just feel like we've just kind of stumbled, like, why can't we put it to a vote? I can't not pay my taxes, and, you know, everybody says, oh, it's okay, let's let her have a few years off. So I'm gonna pay the same amount of taxes, and I have these turbines interfering with my daily life. And then I have, you know, this gentleman has to follow all the no noise and, you know, have his lights in a certain area. But it's okay that my farm's getting affected and I can't build on it or pass it down to my children, because what do I have to pass down to them now? You know, it's gonna be a mess for years. So I really hope that you guys are taking this serious, because I really think it's gonna affect our economy. I know they keep saying it's gonna grow it. I feel in my mind that it's not gonna grow it, that it's going to cause a lot of problems for all of us, health and everything else. So I really hope that you take this serious
thank you.
and think about the people that it is going to affect.
Anyone else have a comment? Yes.
I do. Hi.
You have a name?
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
Angie,
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. My name is Angie Castle. My husband sent in a letter. He's actually builds wind farms, and I've been to thousands of wind farms all over the world, are all over with him. I have never, I mean, the farms that I have been to, I've never heard of anybody getting hurt, getting sick. I've never heard, I mean, I guess with how much it brings in and the wind farms bring into our cities. It pays our taxes, our, you know, is our schools. It does our roads. And until you see actual, if somebody's getting, I mean, you know, people of sick that are getting sick from wind turbines, we want to see proof of that too.
I think we're getting off the subject.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I think,
Okay.
but we do have to, we're here for the decommissioning
Okay.
on this one here, folks. So if you've got any ideas towards the decommissioning, that's really more of what we're here for tonight.
And Mr. Chairman, can I say something real quick? We are collecting letters in opposition and support in our office. We will provide you those in a form, hopefully, in office.
Any other comments this time from the public? Yes, sir.
Robert Keller, Woodwall Township. I'd just like to offer some support for the additional 150% or something, you know, more than what the original estimate is for the decommissioning, just based on change. One of the recent things that have been reported lately is that the turbine blades themselves are not recyclable. It's you know, a major cost just to take each blade down, thousands of dollars per blade. So there's things like that that you need to stay on top of.
Well, I agree. Everything's gonna cost more tomorrow to fix than what it costs
There you
today.
go.
That's all I say.
Thank you.
Yes.
Jean Roosevelt, Red Council. She didn't state where she was from.
I'm sorry, I live in Owasso.
Something I'm concerned with is that we talk about the complaints and the decommissioning, but we're not putting timelines in there. I think if a resident comes up to the clerk or to the board and says, hey, you gotta put a timeline in there because this could drag on and drag on, because, till we get around to it. I mean, the fence is on the test
There's
towers.
recommended timelines here from,
For complaints,
Yeah.
complaints?
yeah.
Okay, I guess I didn't see that.
Oh, you didn't get a copy.
That was the red line that I did. I
Yeah.
wrote the timeline in there. There wasn't one in the staff
Because
recommendation.
the test tower's supposed to have fences around them. I think one does, I know one does, and there's two more that don't. That's been up for 3 or 4 years. If we put timelines, even for us, that we have to fix this, or push them to fix this, it doesn't get pushed down, we're gonna talk about it. It forces us and them to meet deadlines and stuff correctly in a timely
I
manner.
agree, no ordinance should be made, it cannot be enforced. I agree 100% with you on that. And it should be enforced. Any other comments at this time on the subject?